All right, welcome back, of course, to the One Giant Podcast special edition, as we've been doing here on YouTube, where we want to bring what the people want. Michael R., subscriber to the channel. We were just chatting moments ago, essentially, where we decided you were asking some great questions around what the Giants could or should do. And this was based off of the previous mock that I had run talking about that trade down option. So before we dive in on it, we're going to cover a couple of scenarios. Michael, you were specifically asking about maybe looking to get multiple picks in the second round, but I think there's also an option when you look up even to that first round scenario. But before we do, another piece that is, of course, worth talking about is how are the Giants going to pay for their draft selections here as we work our way through. They've got a little chunk of change in terms of cap room as it stands right now. And then there's the other piece of it, and that's potential cut candidates when you think especially around draft prospects that you're going to be bringing in, how it's going to change your depth chart, and then, of course, too, dead cap money versus cap savings. So the big names that come to mind relatively easily are Will Hernandez, because if you're going to bring in an offensive lineman, you think he's going to move into that right guard starting role potentially, then you're really looking at the depth across that line in the offseason, structured shoulder. So you think that he has a good chance to remain on this roster, though outside shot, he could still be a cut candidate in spite of the restructure. But Will Hernandez would be one. A guy like Dante Pettis that we took a flyer on last year, his dead cap number is 0, and you can get a nice chunk of savings off of him as well. And then you can even look at punter Riley Dixon. We have another player down on the practice squad, young guy that we think could step right up into that punter role for us. That would be another move that they could make, clearing north of $7 million in cap space. Dead cap hit number will be down around $1 million or so. So those are options to help clear this room. And then even some guys that you took flyers on in this offseason, some of them were contract players that you expect to be there. Then there's a handful that were essentially signed to futures contracts, which just means you have the chance to be in camp and to compete. So those could play factors as well as far as creating the room. But ultimately, if there's one thing we learned from free agency this year, it is that when you look at these contracts and the numbers for Golladay, for Adoree Jackson, we didn't think we necessarily had all the money to do that, plus bring back Leonard Williams. But to Kevin Abrams' credit, he found a way to manufacture some space there, restructure contracts. So maybe there's still an opportunity for another couple players on an extension. We know Bradbury got restructured. Martinez didn't, though. Maybe there's wiggle room there. And then you can look on the back end of the roster as well, a guy like Logan Ryan, who was extended or signed to an extension last season. So you can make those numbers work, but the point is valid when you just think about how many roster spots, and Andy and I talked about this on a podcast, I think a couple of weeks ago, about there's only so many spots here that you can fill. So quality over quantity is certainly something you can look at, and that's why running through, we're going to do 2 mock scenarios here, the first of which is going to be addressing Michael's quandary about maybe trying to get an extra pick in the second round. And then we'll move into our version, or at least my most recent version, trying to target specific players and getting value. Recently, there's been some speculation that the Giants are at least willing to discuss the idea of trading down out of 11. So just to cover that briefly here, the reason being, and we said this in some of the other mocks, when you go back and look at 11, if the Giants are going offensive linemen, and we're going to take a look at that here, then certainly it makes sense to stay there because there's talent. But if the Giants are looking at the edge rushers early in this draft, when you start to look through Kwity Paye and Ojulari and Owe, and then you get into the second round, we've covered Joseph Osai at times. Certainly there's a lot of talent there. But when you think about where they are on the big boards overall, they're really more 15, 16, 17 kind of range, and then into the 20s and even back to the end of the first round. So then it's about value, right? If you love the player at 11, then you take him, you don't look back, and there's no concerns. But if you think, if a guy like Parsons, and I know people will say this is sacrilege, but if somebody wants to come up and get a player that, by the way, very highly touted prospect, but he's going to be starting as an inside linebacker first and then giving you an opportunity off the edge on third downs. That's where he's going to develop his game. It's not a knock. He can be a fantastic prospect. But if somebody wants to come up for him, if somebody wants to come up for Jalen Waddle, then you get real opportunities to create value by trading down, because these are targeted players for certain teams that they're really going to want, right? A top 12 or 13 prospect, where a lot of the talent, the heavy talent in this draft is right there. So that's still something that I think could be on the table, but Let's run through these scenarios and really give an opportunity to look at how you can get great value while moving up the board. So again, quality over quantity. We're going to flip over here. We'll go ahead and open up our mock draft screen. Get our settings in line here. We talk about having care for the positional value. Obviously, we take away the randomness here, because when you do that, sometimes you get very fluky things like teams taking multiple of the same position round after round, or someone really going out of character. And one of the things that I've run into when you do some of these random mock drafts, all of a sudden Kyle Pitts is there at 11, and that throws off any level of thinking that you have about something that's generational talent. Also, no one anticipates him being there. So those are the things you try to safeguard against when you run these mocks. But we'll go ahead and set it up. You see that care for positional value, draft for need as well. Let's enter into the draft room. The first one we're going to do here is Michael R. Thank you for the question. Trading up to get extra value in the second round. That's what we're talking about. So what he was looking at is, and we'll just kick off this draft, is going with a talented player at 11, and that's when we're looking at Rashawn Slater. This is where we're in total alignment. I want to have Rashawn Slater. I want to check that box on the offensive line. Trade down options get you into the room. We're thinking of, could we potentially give ourselves an opportunity to still get a Vera Tucker a little bit further down and create value? But just to make sure that we give ourselves, I want to make sure that I cover this correctly. So I'm just going to do a quick double check here. And then you want to trade. Okay, so you want to move up in that third round. So we're going to cover you here on this. You're willing to go best 11 and best at 42 and then package. So let's start with that Rashawn Slater. I'm with you so far. I love what the option is. Now, when you talk about getting into 42, and this is where we've been here before, right? You're talking about, for me, my next need is edge rusher. I don't go to wide receiver here. And I've done mocks where Diami Brown is a very enticing prospect, and you might want to go that route. Then the other option would be, do you still look for talent like a Jabril Cox and say, hey, he's going to be an inside linebacker, but it's a big upgrade for us alongside of Blake Martinez, athleticism to help you out there. Ronnie Perkins, certainly an opportunity here, right? You see where he's ranked. You can go after that best edge available. He seems to be a climbing prospect, so maybe we're safeguarding a little bit around the idea that he might not totally be there, but you can say Ronnie Perkins if you want. I've consistently gone down the line here and ended up on Joseph Osai, who obviously is a very talented prospect. Said it before, I'll say it again here. This is a kid who gives you a plus 80 in both run defense and pass defense, as a pass rush defense as well. So this is a guy, in terms of versatility, you may be able to put him inside alongside Blake Martinez in support of the run game, or ready to drop back, pick up the running back out of the backfield, the tight end out of the backfield potentially as well. So you like the versatility, get it on the edge, rush the passer. And something that I don't know if we discussed here yet in any of these mocks as far as where guys could fit in, and we'll see how this plays out here before I talk about another position, another player currently on the roster that could see himself moving and changing positional roles to accommodate what we do in this draft. So again, Peyton Turner is there. He's not really in our wheelhouse in terms of need as far as what he's going to be best suited for to do for us. But I mentioned Perkins there at the top. You can certainly go that route. I'm going to stick with the guy that I know and love, and someone that I think is going to be able to be there for us. Now, before we make that move, and I'll go full screen just so in case you're not seeing it, let's get this out of the way. Let's go full screen here so you can get the best view of what we're doing. Let's talk about that trade up scenario, right, to target a player. So when we think about it, we're at 76, and I already kind of know the direction that we may want to go here. And there's only going to be some slight variations between what we see in this mock versus the secondary mock where you're trying to target 2 first-round players. But if we said we wanted to move up and target from 76 and try to get higher on the board, if you think about getting into the 60s range, right, and maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers not going to have a ton of glaring needs, maybe they'd be willing to do it. 64th pick overall, and let's say that we want to come up from 76 there. Is it going to take our 116? Certainly it could. And you can try to get a little bit of value back in this, by which, 176. Now they're coming down a little bit, but getting something in return. Let's throw that offer out there and see if it takes. Listen, they jump at it. Now we can debate about a little bit extra, maybe a fifth round or a sixth round or something extra could get thrown into the mix here. But let's just accomplish the goal, right, of moving further up. And then, by the way, we now have 42, 64, 176, 196, and 201. Another opportunity still exists here to package 176 and some of those sixth round selections to get ourselves up the board again. We'll address that in a moment. For the time being, now we've moved ourselves up the board a little bit more here in that third round, really right up to the edge of the back end of the second round at 64 overall, right? So let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's say that we go with Joseph Ossai here at 42. Bang, done deal. Now, here's the difference that starts to come up when we get into the third round. The big benefit is looking over the board here and talking about who recently went. And by the way, a guy like Peyton Turner, see how much further down he went? That's how you know some of these prospects are talented, but somewhat more role specific. So you need to be careful about when you assess their value in the draft. Another guy just above him there to Green Bay that I obviously have talked about earlier on in the offseason here as far as mock drafts go, and that's Joe Tryon. Really enjoy what he puts on tape. Again, though, edge rusher first, more developmental than a player like Ossai earlier in the second round there where you're getting real value. So we jump ourselves back in. And as you go over the available picks, there's some easy ones. You see Davis here. He's an interesting target that's been rising. You see the rank versus average draft position of 100. So that's why even if he is here, I don't know if he will be, but I'm staying away from a player like that. We talk about safeties. We talk about offensive linemen, but we've already addressed that need in the first round. And from a safety perspective, just to be clear, that's not something that we need, especially at this point of the draft. But as you start to work your way down, we start to think about, for me, it's wide receiver, right? That's the next thing that you could argue, whether in the short term, another versatile weapon, or big picture, what happens if Sterling Shepard isn't brought back following the conclusion of this current contract. So again, a guy like Josh Palmer, he's been on the rise again more recently here out of Tennessee. You see where he sits there. You can think about, a cornerback. Some people have still said, well, what about the slot corner position? That's not really going to be for me. And even supplemental, extra offensive linemen. Guys that I've liked, guys that I've talked about have been Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tylan Wallace, and then Dyami Brown, a player that goes much earlier in most mock drafts. Another guy that I had mentioned is a player like Jalen Darden out of North Texas. Now, smaller school competition level, you worry about it a little bit there. But ultimately, here's the guy. You come down the board a little bit, and you're seeing the average draft rank position there. Sorry, the overall rank position at 87, average ADP at 92. I'm gonna be honest with you. In all the mocks that I have run with him, you're not getting him at 76 just sitting there. And even beyond that, the layer deeper is what is the value of this player? So Amon-Ra St. Brown lined up out of the slot. So now the first thing you're talking about is here's a guy I can plug in long-term to replace Sterling Shepard potentially. The short-term, though, is he's also a guy that can line up on the outside. So now when you think about your wide receiver sets, and I'm not even talking about getting to 4 wide receiver sets, I'm talking about Kenny Golladay has to come off the field for a rep. Okay, you want to slide out Shepard, who's played on the outside, even though we prefer him on the inside in the slot position. Fine. Put him on the outside. Amon-Ra St. Brown can step into the slot position and be a very dangerous weapon there. Likewise for Darius Slayton. You can mix and match these any way that you want. And he is a guy that's going to be a prominent wide receiver in an offense at the NFL level. How long it takes him to develop, as with any rookie player, that's to be seen. But I really love him as a prospect, especially in the third round. So you trade back up to target this player because he's not going to be there when you sit at 76. And we can scroll back through and we talk about some previous selections here. I just want to see where the next best wide receiver that went ahead of this. And you see how long it is. There you go. So Rondell Moore by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Teams that are going to be in the market for a wide receiver. Oh, there you go. 37, Elijah Moore. There's been opportunities where the Eagles go ahead and take Amon-Ra St. Brown in the spot if Moore is gone. You can think about other teams like the Detroit Lions, depending on what they do in the first round, coming out and then looking to supplement what they do there. So when you start to work your way through this here, you have to think about what some of the potential risk rewards are of other teams that are going to target wide receivers. So I like coming up the board. And before we make that move, let's take a look at another trade opportunity. We talk about, again, let's increase that value, right? We gave up our 4th round pick to make this move earlier into the back end of the 2nd round, essentially. So let's go ahead and see how we can move with 176, 196, and 201 to give ourselves a little bit of extra value. And realistically, if you're talking about moving up, I have a player in mind that we can look at. There's also opportunities at a couple different positions. Running back can be one you think about in that 5th round kind of range, 176. You can think about inside linebacker, depending on who's available for you as well. But if we wanted to move around that board, let's just think about, let's try the Indianapolis Colts at 127. And we're willing to give 176 and 201 to get up a little bit higher and make sure that we're going to get ourselves extra value out of the target. For sake of argument, let's say that we ask for a 6th round pick next year as well, just to see if we can get value. They reject that first one there. They're even going to reject that again. So this is to Michael's mock scenario, right? What if it takes all 3 to move up that board and get that target? They accept that. Now, maybe we could have gotten, again, something a little bit extra on the back end. But now we've packaged ourselves up and we're going quality over quantity, and we get ourselves a look at a basically back to that 4th round range that we were at 116, a little bit further down. Let's see what kind of prospect we get back. So for me, checking of highest needs, I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown here. I love getting him. And 64, maybe even a little bit higher than you need to, maybe 67, 68. But again, risk reward. You trade that to 70 because you think it's a safe spot. And then all of a sudden you find yourselves getting poached by another team. So make sure you target the guy that you want and go get him. We come up at 127, last pick of the draft we're going to have. So only get 4 players, but quality players that address our areas of need. A couple of options here. You could go a guy like Kendrick Green. I've scouted him a little bit. I like where he's at as a prospect. Again, if you want to go extra depth there. But for me now, there's 2 choices here. The first option is, and we'll take a look at it, it's going to be inside linebacker. Because you can think about, we'll get into a little bit of detail here on some of the thinking. I've seen Derek Barnes go here. Justin Hilliard is a nice selection as well. I do like him. Most of the inside linebackers, pure inside linebackers in this year's draft class, aren't ones that really overexcite you. They're guys that are going to need to get developed a bit more. The other side note to this is, and you're going to hear this again in the 1st round scenario that we're talking about, but taking Joseph Osai and thinking that, hey, this is a player that plays off the edge and we like that. The opportunity you then have is you're going to get an extra look here this season at Oshane Ximines, see what he's capable of. Lorenzo Carter, I think, can be a candidate to kick inside in the linebacker unit and play alongside Blake Martinez. A little bit more athleticism there, can support in the run because he has the body for that as well. Come on with pressure also. So if you think about Osai, Lorenzo Carter, even Oshane Ximines, those 3 players, 2 out of the 3 in Osai and Lorenzo Carter can line up on the edge. And then those same 2 players could potentially play on the interior as well. So versatility. And for Lorenzo Carter, final year of his contract, it's either a prove it, maybe you can be the heir apparent in the middle there for Blake Martinez after his contract, or we found your replacement, right? And Oshane Ximines as well. I think you put him at least a little bit on the hot seat in this year, coming off injury, like Lorenzo Carter. Show us what you're capable of. Otherwise, we need to make sure that we're addressing that need, whether it's in next year's free agency class or in the draft. So that's the footnote here when we talk about linebackers. The other option obviously would be, so we'll pull them up here together. Tight end, I think, is something that you can think about. Great value right now when you look at 96th ranked player on the board in Tommy Tremble out of Notre Dame. And then the other one, though, for me would be running back. I'm fine with waiting for the draft to clear out, let the dust to settle, and then look for guys following the draft to supplement what you've done, bring him into the, certainly bring him into the draft room, bring him into the workout room and see if it fleshes out. But we know we brought in Booker in free agency, a guy like Platzgummer that we brought over from Europe last year. We also took a look at a player like Hilliman Didn't pan out for us, but he was a post-draft signing over the last couple of years. So those are options you have. But when you include linebacker, running back, tight end, and I'll even do you one extra, depending on how you feel about the edge rusher room, if there's a value here that we really like. Here's the way I'll spell it for you. And I just talked about that value. And Michael, let's check to see if that's you there. Shout out in the comments, because I'll almost let you kind of dictate what we want to do here on this one. As we talked about, we've now done Slater. We've now given ourselves Joseph Osai. We now moved up the board to target Amon-Ra St. Brown at basically the back end of the second round, ahead of that third round, where a lot of teams are looking to get value in the wide receiver room. Now we're at the point, though, of highlighting the last possible pick we're going to get here at 127. We can talk about running backs, and if we're going to go that route, I start to get excited about. You talk about Stevenson, certainly that could be a possibility. Obviously, I've mentioned him before. Patterson out of Buffalo, I like him a lot. Tight end, like John Bates, so he's certainly available later on in this draft as well. And there's Jaret Patterson right behind him. I think that Patterson's a rising target, so 4th, 5th round makes a lot of sense if you want to get him. Bates would probably be more 5th round eligible, and we'll talk about that in the next mock, maybe even later than that potentially, if you follow, depending on what boards you're following. For me, if I want to bolster this team in the best way and really send us in on a positive foot, I've already taken care of offensive line. I've already taken care of as well the need at that wide receiver position. Defensively, I can go inside linebacker here if I want. I really like the prospect of Shaka Toney as well. We'll try to get into that a little bit later on in our how it shakes out a little bit, depending. So let's say, tight end's a nice one here. I'm going to go with the value for the running back position here. Let's supplement Saquon Barkley. Let's give ourselves real value, versatile player that can both run and catch the ball out of the backfield. And remember, inside of that running back room, we have Booker, we have Saquon Barkley. That's it. Saquon Barkley off injury, Booker, a veteran with experience, safeguarding against injury. But even if he was your potential for that, it's not going to be a world beater, right? You're not going to necessarily feel like he could carry the load all by himself. You can even think back to last year with a player like Wayne Gallman, where, hey, did he have some nice games? Yes, but there's a reason why he's a backup, and there's a reason why he's out there on the market looking for a job as we speak right now. So running back would certainly be a way that you could go here. And for sake of argument, boy, I really am tossed up here, but let's just say we really like Jaret Patterson and we want to get the value of him. You can go linebacker, you can go cornerback, you can go a lot of different routes here. But the biggest piece is to illustrate about moving up into that second round to target a specific player of need and seeing how the rest of the draft shakes out before we think about who might we want to target in the first round as an extra. Multiple first round picks here after we make our move at 11. So as this mock finishes out, we'll go ahead and get into the draft grade here. And there you go, right? So here's the big move that we made. The trades that we went ahead and made were in the back end. And as you can see, right, took a lot to get there to 127 at the back end of this draft. You can think about whether or not you could have got a little something extra, maybe a future pick. But right off the bat, Rashawn Slater, fantastic grade A at 11. 42nd pick, best available, like the edge rusher. Remember, we mentioned Ronnie Perkins there as well. A- for taking Osai. I love it. Trade up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The trade value, maybe a little rich. That's fine. It takes value to get value. And we go ahead and we get Amon-Ra St. Brown. And we go with another offensive weapon here in Patterson. So 4 players total. That's it. That's the packaging of trying to move up the board. And maybe, yes, there's some world where we could have got a 5th rounder back in return. And you can think about an extra target there, potentially, maybe a linebacker, maybe an extra offensive lineman as well, certainly. So maybe the Patterson pick, running back, if you only have 4 total selections, maybe that's a little bit too luxury, and that's fine to say, but you see the value of all these selections. So 4 quality players addressed all of the areas of need when we talk about the most important, offensive line and edge rusher. That's the first 2 things, and that's the way I think every single mock draft and the way the Giants need to go in the first 2 rounds. So that's for Michael. Now let's show you the other scenario, and that's when we talk about 2 first-round targets. So if we think about this, remember, Slater, Osai, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Patterson, quality players, quality picks, moved around the board a lot. If we go ahead and reset this, though, and now let's think about it from the idea of, again, Taking the best value at 11, this is where we want a player, obviously, like Slater to be there for us. And in most scenarios, we have that opportunity. And there it is again. Before we move into this, though, and we'll go ahead and get our title out of there. Before we move into this, though, now let's again think about moving up this time from 42. And you're going to see striking similarities here. But the difference is maybe going to be about how you feel about the quality of player that you're receiving. So one of the options we start to talk about back into that first round, Buffalo could be a real option there. You can also look at Green Bay, and a lot of mocks are willing to move depending on what wide receivers potentially are there for them. Likewise, Super Bowl runner-up and champion, and the Bucs and the Chiefs could also be players. For the 30th pick overall, we talk about giving up 42 and 116. And this is where maybe you can get that value back, 174. Let's try to run it and see if they take this offer. A lot of scenarios, it does work. Some scenarios, it takes a little bit extra, like you're seeing right now. So if I said it's going to take all of that value there, we'll try to, walk them down here a little bit. And when it's not working with Buffalo, then you can start to think about what are some of the other teams here potentially. Like I said, Kansas City Chiefs maybe are a candidate there, and can you make that happen? And when you're running these mocks, you're also basing it on, hey, are they willing to make this move? And we'll try to accomplish that same goal of getting that extra pick. It's only if they're willing. It's only if they feel like the board has fallen in a way that they can get value by moving out of it. So there you go. We get to 31 with the Kansas City Chiefs. And now this is where it does get interesting, because we've seen a lot of these mocks run here, as we'll take Rashad Slater and start to roll. A lot of these mocks, and we're going to watch for what the Buffalo Bills do here. So there it is. And by the way, why? Right over here. The Buffalo Bills don't move because they're waiting to see where it falls. They want to add defensive value, and they go with Ojulari. And that's a guy that this is exactly why I moved back up, is to target an edge rusher that we really like. And again, the bonus here is a player like Jason Owe. So now this is where you can split hairs about what you accomplished in that previous mock for quality players, right? Versus what you do here. So picking at 31, we like what we have. But again, before we make our selection, let's get back into those trade waters. Let's try to, we're going right back up there because we want to try to target our player in Amon-Ra St. Brown in that third round. Let's make sure that we're able to get him. So we can talk about different places. Houston Texans have been a great option here for this type of play. 76, we want 67. Let's try to give them 196 to make this happen for ourselves and not worry about anything back in return. Can't get it done? Okay, fine. How about 175? That extra pick that we received still doesn't get the job done. So we're going to try to take a look at maybe another team that might be in the market for that trade down opportunity. But boy, at that point, though, 62, you're talking about the Green Bay Packers. That's a big move to try to get up that board there. So this could be a little bit delicate in trying to make this happen. So if we want to get that done, let's go ahead and throw them a 6th round draft pick next year. And you get a limited opportunity here. This is like being on the phone with them and you're trying to, and there you go. So a 6th round next year's draft. This is where you're on the phone with them. You're trying to make it work. And at some point, the clock's running out and the pick needs to get put in. So we make that deal happen for ourselves. And now we again have moved up this time to 67, just at the start, at the top of that 3rd round there. So when we come back into our draft position, now we have this luxury of being in this spot to take a quality edge rusher, someone that we like, that is big, athletic, out of Penn State, as we know, has given you a great rating over the last 2 years, 19 and 2020. You see that 2020 grade, even in a weird year, still graded out at 85. I like Owe a lot. I think he's one of those quality players that's just ahead of the Osais and Perkins of the world, regardless of fit on a particular team. I think he's just slightly up there, put him closer to the class of Ojulari, Kwity Paye, and the like. So we're able to grab him at 31. Now we go ahead and rotate our way through and get ourselves to that 67th overall pick, where again, the goal is Amon-Ra St. Brown. When we find ourselves up here, now we scroll ourselves down. There he is. So we again have found tremendous value. And now we're going to show you a different version of this, I think, that should be available as we move our way through to give us an opportunity to bring in extra talent. Because now we're going to have still 175 and 201. A player like Patterson, not going to make it there at 175. But it doesn't mean that there isn't quality that we can go take a look at. So let's see how it plays out. Difference here that we're talking about is maybe a little bit better talent in Owe over a player like Osai, though I'm a big fan of Osai, and then the extra pick. And again, how valuable is 201? We can debate it, but there are developmental players that you can find later in the draft that do allow you to really look at saying, okay, short term, long term, how do we make sure that we bring ourselves up when we talk about years, 2 years and 3 years from now? How do we supplement what we have? So 175, this is where a player that I highlighted before, Shaka Toney, comes into play. Now, a couple of things here, right? One, we've gone to Penn State for a lot of our value here in this draft. We're actually doing it without Parsons. We're going the other way with Owe. And now, again, this speaks to what I was mentioning before. Let's talk about, he gave you that 72.5 Pro Football Focus grade out of his last season at the college level. While we're here, I'll give you a little bit of extra take on him, just from the prospect standpoint, about what we're hoping to accomplish and what they're saying about this player when you think about general prospects and what the talent and the projection for him at the NFL level is going to be. So while I pull it up here real quick, we'll go ahead and look at this, and then we'll talk about that extra value that you get by still having your 201st pick in the NFL draft. So just quickly to give you the rundown on him, here's why I like Shaka Toney and why I think he balances and fits in. 6'3", 238. This is a guy that you're talking about could be a pass rush specialist for you, and yet with that type of length and also speed and quickness, this is a guy that I think you can start to consider rotating into that linebacker room side along Martinez. So coverage linebacker potential here as well. So when you think about having Owe and you think about now having Shaka Toney, you've given yourself versatility about who lines up where when, and throw Lorenzo Carter into that mix as well. 3 versatile players that give you different looks. And when we talk about Patrick Graham in this defense, we obviously talk a lot about versatility, situational players that are going to give you some value. So let's go ahead and pull the trigger on Shaka Toney here, get ourselves down to 201, and then grade ourselves out, remembering that we were able to get, and as we come up here at 201, options are, you can go into that running back room if you want. I think you're safe to wait for it. You can go into the offensive line and supplement what you've taken so far. I like some of the veteran guys we've brought in. And again, developmental at best is what we're talking about here at this point. But here's the guy that I enjoy, and that's John Bates out of Boise State. I pulled the trigger on him because now we're talking about the ability, whether immediately, as we've heard us if you listen to the podcast, moving on from Evan Ingram, or in the big picture. This is a guy that can line up. He's a willing and able blocker, so it's going to give you an opportunity there. And then obviously you're also talking about a player that can move out in space. I keep going back to this reference point. It's not perfect, but a player like a Kevin Boss, right? Does a nice job blocking, athletic enough to get out there in space. And you can even think about him as a Kyle Rudolph in training is where you want him to project and grow. So that allows you to say Toaloa, you can maybe moved on from as well. When we go now and talk about the overall grade of this draft, what have we accomplished, right? Same thing. Took a little bit to get up there to get to that 31st pick. We get that A grade on Slater, an A- on Jason Owe. And again, I think a little bit better talent. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown comes into play as we had last time. Shaka Toney, though, another solid grade on that selection there. And then John Bates. It's one extra player, but the difference between having that extra player here at 175 versus, remember, when we did it in that scenario for the second round, we got Slater, we got Osai, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then ultimately we went with Patterson there. You can go inside linebacker like a Justin Hilliard if you want, and those are the 4 players you get. In this version, though, we're able to get not only an extra defensive player, a versatile weapon in Shaka Toney, we also get to get another weapon on the offensive side of the ball and a guy that theoretically we could be looking at next year being one of our top 2 tight ends as Evan Ingram moves off in the offseason. At the end of the day, you can see how these end up being relatively similar just in terms of the value in the players that you get. Talk about the big trade down, but 4 or 5 players in this draft, and I think 5 is worth having, right? And you saw how much it took to move up and get yourself ultimately that extra higher third round pick. When you keep packaging to go up that way, and you've already lost a little bit moving up in the second round as well, it just makes it a little bit trickier to get where you want to go there. By keeping it in this regard, that 42 and the fourth rounder to move up just a little bit, 11 picks to get there, you give yourself that opportunity to get a little bit more talent and then still accomplish what you want. Now, the interesting thing I would say too is all those moves to get 4 quality players in the extra second round pick, here 5 players getting back into the first round. You can make the case that no matter which way you want to slice it, so say you go Slater at 11 and then you stay at 42 and you take Osai, it's still a quality player, and you can probably get it done to get Amon-Ra St. Brown and maybe still get another inside linebacker or edge rusher, depending on what you think. You might be able to still maintain 5 guys there. But the difference of moving around the board in terms of slight movement still in the third round versus up into the second round, that's the difference of what it costs you to get there and being able to maintain an extra pick at the back end. Otherwise, you got to kind of fire all your bullets to get up the board and give yourself that look. That being the case, though, these are great options. So in contrast to what we did in the trade down scenario, here's how you go. High quality, and you don't necessarily worry about addressing every single need that you want to have. Go back to the original version here, or in a trade down scenario. You trade back from 11, you still get a quality player, maybe an edge rusher. If you trade back with the Cardinals at 16, the Patriots at 15, even a little bit further, Dolphins at 18, the Chicago Bears at 20, if they really want to come get Waddle, you can still get a quality edge rusher. The difference is, though, then you're starting to think about packaging back up into the first round and make sure you don't miss out on the next need that you may have. And because when you trade down, a lot of Tucker offensive line is paramount concern for you. You got to make sure you get there. In the trade back, though, because you get the extra picks, 2 routes, extra picks in future drafts, which is always nice, or extra picks in this draft, you can move around the board a little bit more comfortably and still get yourself 6 total players. You can still get yourself the wide receiver, the inside linebacker. This is after you've got an offensive line edge rusher, obviously. Then you can get yourself a tight end. You can get yourself a running back. You can get yourself an extra offensive lineman. So that's where the 7 picks all together here, when you do that trade back early, that's what's nice about it. And it does become luxury. Maintaining 196 and 201 means you can get Bates and then maybe a guy that I've highlighted before in Robert Jones, an offensive lineman that you can use in a lot of different ways as a depth piece and developmental that could be a starter for you down the line. So that's splitting hairs, though. Packaging up 4th and 2 6th-round picks to get up into a nicer round for yourself, fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it, and I love it. And Andy Makowitz brought this up on the podcast. Quality over quantity. How much space do we have? What's the cost going to be for our rookie draft class as well? The other difference is, too, if you're going to go with less picks but filling your immediate needs, of course, that's the big picture view. Saying, yes, we know that we want to get better. Maybe a cornerback even behind our free agent acquisition of Adoree Jackson and our prior year's acquisition of Bradbury. Well, Bradbury's probably on a 1 contract deal given his age. Adoree Jackson's going to be 28 when this one runs out. Is he the 2nd contract candidate for us, or do we want to make sure that we have guys behind us? You can take a look at a developmental 4th-round player at the cornerback position potentially if you have that extra pick. You can talk about defensive line. I'm not worried about it, but if you say you lost Alvin Tomlinson and you're kind of in this Band-Aid right now, you want to be able to go after that also. But the reality is you're not going to get the perfect prospect at every single position of need. So pick your biggest 2 or 3 needs, make sure you check those boxes, and everything else you can look at next year's free agency class, next year's draft class to fill out those other areas of need, because you also don't know who are our free agents, who needs to get paid, and how is it going to impact what we do. That's how we had to allow Dalvin Tomlinson to walk, though internally we do think ultimately they were planning on moving on from no matter what, because one final note here, remember Dave Gettleman? A couple of things. One, he's not known to give out second contracts to defensive linemen, specifically nose tackle type linemen. That's what Dalvin Tomlinson was. He didn't, and that's fair. And then the other piece around the trade down, he's never traded down. In the history of being a GM, he's never traded down. He believes in the value of the board. We saw him trade up for a DeAndre Baker. That didn't work out. But the willingness to move up in the draft is certainly something that he's been capable of and willing to do. So that is where, whether the fan Michael R., whether it was your scenario of getting an extra second-round pick or my version of getting that extra first-round pick at the back end, that's something that the Giants will be willing to do if you're targeting specific players of need. We will run a couple of these going into next week as we highlighted on the podcast. We're going to talk about this could be Monday, Wednesday, and then Friday, obviously ahead of the draft. That'll actually start on Thursday night. So Monday and Wednesday are going to be our only two options to kind of showcase these for you. Monday, what do we want to be the case? And then what do we think could be the case, right? So what do we think the Giants are going to do versus what we think they should do? And then if we think they're going to move and target players, who are our best scenarios at each position of need? Offensive line. Do we have to have Slater? Will we be comfortable with Vera Tucker? What about a guy like Jalen Mayfield? Is he good enough for us to feel comfortable taking him in the second round potentially? Or do we think that the Giants are going to go with Waddle at 11 or Devontae Smith? And then how would we think they're going to address these areas of need in the second and third round when you think about needing edge and offensive line as well? So that'll be Monday and Wednesday. Going to be a ton of fun. We have a presser coming up later today from Dave Gettleman. So we'll cover that tomorrow morning right here on YouTube Live. And of course, on the podcast, OGP Wednesday. Be sure to check that out. Thank you for joining in with us. And as always, Andy Makowitz would want you to know, let's go Big Blue.